Hi, I'm Bruce, and you've tuned in to the Space Force Association's Spacepower Internet Radio Show, and I've got a great show for you today. I've got two guests. One is the CEO of a global consultancy firm, and you'll hear how he supports space activities. And the other senior vice president at a major corporation in charge of space logistics, which I found is much more interesting than it sounds. You won't want to miss those interviews. They're coming up next. It is a pleasure to have Jack Smith as my guest today. He is the CEO and founder of Fortuna, which is a veteran-owned global consultancy delivering customized, innovative solutions to solve any business problem on their website. That's what it says. We prioritize hiring veterans, provide efficient and effective services to clients, and growth through simplicity with Fortuna is a tagline. Jack, thank you so much for being here today.
A pleasure to be here, Bruce. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this.
Likewise.
So I did a little bit of research on your website. I've got things like heart-centered leadership, purpose-driven leadership. You even have a purposeful prosperity podcast. That's a tongue twister.
It is a little bit. Got to get the P's in there. Pa, pa, pa.
You got them all. Yeah, the alliterations there.
The alliteration, yeah.
Yeah, I want to talk about that. But first, you're an Air Force veteran.
Yes,
You
sir.
served during Operation Iraqi Freedom, and you founded Fortuna in 2012. And there's, if I'm not mistaken, the company's grown to over 500 people. I mean, it's
It is a small business, so it grows and shrinks. We actually got as high as 800. We're about 300-ish today, but it ebbs and flows as contracts begin and end.
yeah, that's a major achievement.
Thank you.
That's not a small business. That's a big business. But you founded in 2012, so there's a story there. I got to hear it.
Yeah, so I founded the company originally in 2012. My background's in project program management. And so I really I was a PMO director before I started Fortuna. So really just wanted to kind of sit on the other side of the table and help PMOs do better, implement projects more effectively, and be that bridge to the business and technology. I had my son at the time. And so the company actually didn't take off, and we actually shuttered it for a moment and then resurrected it again in 2014 as a government consultancy. And that's really when we got certified as a stable veteran-owned business. We got established here in California. So started in California, just doing odd jobs, IT stuff, project implementations, building teams on demand. During COVID, we grew from 40 to 800 employees in 9 months. It was pretty wild. And so got us on the Inc. 5000 a couple of times. Twice we were one of the 100 fastest growing veteran-owned businesses in America. I went from entrepreneur to CEO overnight and tried to figure all that stuff out. And really what I've spent the last couple of years doing is really building bridges for veterans, reservists, and spouses to the jobs of the future in AI and new space in particular.
Tell me about that, though. I mean, building bridges. I mean, that transition. I think every young man always wants to be in the military. For me, it was the Air Force. It would have been the Space Force if it was around.
That's why I do the SFA now. I would have definitely gone Guardian if it was a thing, but I got out in 04.
But how does that work? I mean, I don't really have a sense of when you transition out. I mean, what was like your career? I assume it ended around 2012, and you're transitioning out. Oh, then
No, I got out in 04.
You got out in 04. Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I just did my 4 and got out. Best decision I made to get in, and the best decision I made to get out. I was enlisted, and it was not the right fit. I asked too many questions.
What is it that you did, if I can ask?
I was a 3COX2, a computer programmer. I've been an IT guy since I was a little kid. I remember where I was at when my mom bought my first computer when I was 12, taught myself to program, hacked my high school's network for my first job and got a job out of it.
Nice.
And then went into the military and decoded and validated weather observations in Omaha, Nebraska.
Yeah. Oh, my wife is from Nebraska, so we won't go down that rat hole. Go Big Red. I'll just say that. So how did you just decide that you wanted to build a business to really help veterans transition?
Well, so I had a pretty easy transition myself. In 04, I took my uniform off. I was a coder already, and I literally doubled my salary, which I found out was still half of what I should have been making, and was super excited about that. So I had to change jobs again. But, I jumped right into government consulting and contracting and really just stepped right into it on an Air Force base. So my transition was relatively simple. And then I went the private sector route for a little while, being a PMO director. In 2014, when I really started to get involved in the veteran space, I found that most other veterans didn't have quite as easy transition journey as I did. Right, the skill sets don't always match. They're not always clear. They speak a foreign language almost, and so I really wanted to position ourselves. I prided myself on being a disabled veteran business. We always had a veteran preference and all that, but as an IT company, it was always hard to kind of get them employed and, got to match the right skills and all of that. And so my customers kept asking me why we weren't giving them more vets, and all I could give them was excuses. And I was tired of doing that. So I started to build the bridges and ladders of Fortuna. And so, we connect with the CSP program and TAP and SkillBridge and really trying to solve. One of the cool things that we're working on right now is I'm trying to figure out how to build the bridge from certified to qualified, right? That apprenticeship program that is really necessary in IT. SkillBridge does a great job of graduating skilled resources that have never been able to prove their capabilities in the wild. And you need 2 years of proven capabilities to go get a job on your own. How do you bridge that gap? And so we're working on trying to win contracts where we can build apprentice programs where a handful of them are newly minted SkillBridge folks, and then you've got 1 or 2 senior levels overseeing it and guaranteeing it. So, I spend as much time as I can trying to get connected to those places where I can help get connected.
Yeah, that's interesting stuff. And you also mentioned too in COVID, you had to move from being an entrepreneur to a CEO because
Yes.
you had to bring on what was it? You went from just a handful of people to over 800 people. So
40 to 800 in 9 months.
I've been part of a fast growing startup, but I'm not sure I was part of that fast of a growing startup. How does that work?
It's a bumpy road. Growth is hard. It's expensive. It's complicated. And there are humans involved all along the way as well. I learned a lot, made a lot of mistakes. And, I remember the other part of what I was going to say. The other part of what I focus on is helping entrepreneurs grow and scale. And so I built all the tools I wished I would have had as a CEO growing from 40 to 800. You don't have enough to hire the experts that you need full time, but you need those experts, especially with that much rapid growth, whether it's sales, marketing, operations, fulfillment, ERP, depending on what kind of company you are. All that stuff takes time and money that you don't normally have as you're growing. And especially we're a people business, so it's all payroll. And they want to get paid every 2 weeks, and we get paid in 60 or 90 days sometimes. So you got to kind of figure out how to bridge that gap. So that was an adventure, and frankly, still a learning. As I said, we're down to about 250 now. We kind of shrink and grow based on our customers' needs. And some accounts were as many as 300 at some points and 50 at others, and kind of staying flexible. We call it the accordion model.
Yeah. So just out of curiosity, so not everybody starts a business, when they get out of the Air Force, right? So what inspired you to decide to jump into the entrepreneurial side of things?
Entrepreneurial has been in my DNA since I was a kid. Back when I was in school, I loved lemonade stand and like anything that you could do this hard. Thinking about business, I was always good at math and I was always good at problem solving. And I think that's part of why I didn't make a great airman. I was really good at my job, but I was also very opinionated, which made its own complications. But I think that's really what led me to be an entrepreneur. I didn't make the greatest employee either. And it was really because I wanted to be the change I wanted to see in the world. And without the influence as, a mid-level manager or leader in an organization, you're kind of stuck. And so for me, entrepreneurism was always in my DNA. I'm a serial entrepreneur. I'm an angel investor. I've got a small portfolio company that we invest in, early stage startups. And that's part of what I do here, at the SFA now is kind of getting engaged with those early stage growing space businesses in our various communities and making sure that we build the network and get everybody connected and grow the space economy.
Yeah. I want to talk about the SFA role that you've got, because you're making a huge impact in just a minute here. But another thing that caught my attention, so just all over your website and what I hear from people just kind of setting up this interview, just your style of leadership. And on your website, it says heart-centered leadership. Tell me about that. That's clearly a very important thing about what you do?
Well, I think heart-centered leadership is really telling people what they need to hear, not what they want to hear. It's about being kind, not nice. Kind isn't always nice. Kind is what you need to succeed. And so as often as we can as regular as we can, we put the human first. We put our purpose first, right? So I talk about it. Attrition's not really a thing that happens at my company because we put our mission first. Connections with veterans, reservists, and spouses. Well, I got a team of veterans, reservists, and spouses and people who are committed to those communities. So we all just kind of lean in on the why, make sure we take care of our customers, and the rest of it kind of takes care of itself. And so, with the podcast, I really wanted, entrepreneurs, right? There's an altruist conundrum, right? To do something altruistic is to do it without fanfare and without accreditation and all that. But entrepreneurs are out there making a difference and an impact in their communities. And most of us do what we do because we want to be the change we want to see in the world. And so they do it, but they don't really talk about it as much. And so I really built Purposeful Prosperity to kind of showcase all these amazing humans and the causes that they support and why they support them and how that they're using their prosperity to create change and purpose in their own worlds and communities.
Wow, that's interesting. Let's give a little plug for your podcast at Purposeful Prosperity. Where do people find it?
Purposefulprosperity.com, or you can find it at gofortuna.com.
All right. Nice. Have to tune that one in. Hey, so let's switch to the Space Force Association.
Absolutely.
So we both, I think, have gotten pulled in, as I think everybody has, by the CEO, Bill Wolf.
But he's got a gravity to him. There's no doubt about that.
He does. But tell me how you got drawn into the orbit here.
Well, it started small, so I actually didn't. It even didn't start with me. I actually sent a team of mine to the Spacepower conference 2 years ago, wanting to get more involved. As I said, I'm looking for places to connect to veterans and spouses and reservists. And I was noticing, especially with Guardians, that there's not a welcoming community in the veteran community for them yet, right? We just don't really recognize them as a service. They've kind of become the little brother to the Coast Guard almost, when you go to a veterans conference. And so I wanted to make sure that they had a place to connect. They're also my fellow 3COs for the most part. They're all Air Force. We speak the same language. We're really all IT people. And so, like I said, if the Space Force had been a thing, I was at Offutt. I'm close. I'm hopeful that I become a legacy Guardian because I was in the Air Weather Service. So, but it matters, right? Space has always been a passion of mine since I was a little kid and read Ender's Game. And then the whole series, eventually I wanted to be a space miner since I was a kid. I thought I love the economy and the functionality and the operation of what it means to really be an interplanetary species. And so I've always wanted to be a part of that. And so I started to see from the veterans that there wasn't this bridge. And so I wanted to kind of get involved. And so we first started out, we were going to just run the NorCal chapter here in California. And next thing I know, he asked me to help with the Western region. And then a couple of months later, hey, Jack, you want to help with national? And really, I think it comes from my background in program and project management, right? What chapter operations is all about is predictable practices and repeatable outcomes, right? We are a distribution network for information and impact for the Space Force, right? HIPPY reports directly to the CSO. We get commands from there. They come to us, and then we get them out to the chapters and into the communities. And we get to be that representative for the Space Force where they can't be, right? There's only 10 bases in the world. We're in all those places, but we're in all the places that they're not. And we're the magnet that weaves the web that connects them to the industry that they need, because unlike most other services, they're so small that public-private partnership is critical. And the space is evolving so rapidly that access to emerging technologies and capabilities is paramount. So, me in chapter operations, I get to kind of build the processes and the protocols and the hows and whats to kind of make sure that we all get together and grow both inner chapter, right? Making sure that everybody's working together and that they're working as a unit in the space economy. We're all growing. It's an area and a segment that's getting a lot more additional investment. And so we're kind of right there at the web.
Yeah. Yeah, it's exciting to see things growing. You hosted some events here not long ago as well in the chapter, kind of a kickoff kind of thing. And I know there's a lot of activity on the West Coast for chapters. So
absolutely.
Yeah, and it's an interesting time in the Space Force as well. You mentioned the partnership between industry and the Space Force. So talk to me a little bit more about that. Again, I'm a fan, but not a practitioner of kind of the inner workings of, the industry and the Space Force and how they get together. So how do you see that, just in light of what's going on around the world, how do you see that relationship building, and what's the importance of it?
I mean, I think the relationship is that these technologies are merging and moving so rapidly that, like, the traditional services, even the old school, the Lockheeds and the Boeings and the Northrops of the world, right? They're all doing their missions and they're doing great work, but the smaller businesses move at another level and pace, right? And bringing that new capabilities, and they often get gobbled up into the bigger, broader machine as the capabilities get proven. And that's really, I think, where we come in as the SFA, is that connection to those new emerging ones and seeing which of the companies grow and flourish and connect. As far as the jobs go, I mean, they're all businesses. So every business that's a space business needs all the other administrative and support resources, sales, marketing, operations, and such, that may or may not be heavily technical. They may not be aerospace related. They're often technical related, right? A lot of these jobs are IT jobs. That's part of why we all get along as an old 3COX2 myself. We're all just nerdy computer guys. And so how do we help them run their businesses? Because a lot of times they're more Wozniak than jobs, right? And so that's where we kind of come in and help breach the gaps and connect the network.
Yeah. It's interesting stuff too. I wanted to, and you actually, if I'm not mistaken, hopefully I'm not breaking news here, but you're also planning a podcast for SFA.
I am. We're just getting started. It's called the Voices of Space podcast. We are just shooting our first podcast episodes in a couple of weeks. So it's probably a month, 6 weeks-ish until we start to publish. But going to be doing more of that, right? Entrepreneur to entrepreneur. What are they doing? What brought them to the Space Force? What are their capabilities? And then exploring how both civilian and military applications of those, and really sharing that with the community. So that way that all of our SFA members can really tell their story. So if anybody's interested, don't hesitate to reach out at jack.smith@ussfa.org.
Yeah. That'll be fun. I'll be tuning in for those. I'm excited about that for you, Jack.
I'm looking forward to it, man. Entrepreneur to entrepreneur. I just get to be fanboy and ask some questions. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, that'll be good. Hey, so we got just a couple more minutes here before we wrap. But I do want to hear some of your plans for your company going forward. Kind of, how does the whole consultancy side of things work? What's your hopes and dreams for things in the next 12 to 18 months?
Just leaning in and making a better connection. So right now we do a lot of work in the state of California, a number of other states. So I'm really looking to make some connections with the DoD. We are a hub zone and SDVOSB business and got a network of cleared resources in our veterans of service and spouses. So, looking for opportunities to bring that more to bear. Our partnership with the SFA has been helpful, and that has definitely opened a lot of doors for us. And then just opportunities. We're a subcontractor for most of our work. And so we work with the big guys that I can't even say out loud because they won't acknowledge and they wouldn't appreciate. But because of that, it's hard for us to prime. So, looking for opportunities to do more. They hire us to build out the teams to do the work anyway. So opportunities to showcase who we are.
Yeah. Nice stuff. Hey, last question. So just kind of going back to grown up years, take us through a little bit of that and how kind of, things growing up kind of brought you to where you're at today. What shaped your thinking? Why space? Why the Air Force? Why technology?
Okay, I have a fairly solid answer. So I'm a super nerd. I used to do book reports.
What does that mean?
I used to do book reports on encyclopedias in summer break for fun.
Okay, that qualifies. You're qualified. Yeah, you're qualified.
So super nerd, video games and all of that. So always was passionate about space. I've been fascinated about it. I've learned about the solar system. I was self-taught astronomer as a kid. I loved fantasy books, in particular space. Like I said, I read Ender's Game as a young man. And I do remember where I was when my mother bought my first computer when I was 12. And like with Good Will Hunting,
where was it?
Computers just made sense. The Oklahoma State Fair, 1992.
And what was the computer?
What's that?
What was the computer?
A 486, and it wasn't even like they weren't branded at the time, right? They were like build your
I
own
remember that.
and
Yeah.
chips and stuff, and I mean they were selling them at the state fair at the time, so like that's how novel they still were. And far from the Air Force, so I come from a long line of defenders of the country. My family has defended the U.S. going all the way back to the Revolutionary War and almost every conflict that we
Really?
participated in,
Wow.
including 3 versions of Jack Smith in the last century, including myself. And then my brother has served in Afghanistan as a Marine. Service and defending our country is something that we're very passionate and proud about. I go all the way back to Reverend Morgan, who was aide de camp to George Washington. So, service was always kind of on the journey. In fact, originally I was supposed to go the officer route. I got an Air Force ROTC scholarship, and it was like a 9-year commitment, 5 years of school and 4 years. I'm like, I'm 18. That's half my life. So I took a academic scholarship. Like I said, I was nerdy. I took an academic scholarship and was going to go play basketball, and I drank away both of those in a semester and a half and enlisted in the Air Force instead of being an officer.
You're not the only one I've heard that story from.
No, I mean, like I said, it worked out. It really helped me figure out who I wanted to be, and instilled in me the determination. I think that's the things that make a veteran successful as an entrepreneur. That all comes in those first few months of basic training and learning how to live and breathe in the military protocol. And I think that's why 1 in 5 veteran businesses succeed, where 1 in 10 non-veteran businesses succeed.
Yeah, that's incredible. What a great story. Thank you for sharing it with us, Jack.
Well, thank you for asking, Bruce. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. Jack Smith, CEO and founder of Fortuna, and does a whole bunch of things. You can find gofortuna.com as the website. Purposeful Prosperity podcast you can find on there. And what was the one that you're going to do for SFA? Did you have a title for it?
Voices of Space. I don't even know that it's got a website yet. You were just booking our first invitees.
Okay. Well, maybe we'll have you back on when you kick it off.
I love it.
Yeah,
look forward to it.
Thanks so much,
Bruce.
Jack.
Cheers.
The Space Force Association is a way you can get involved in the space community, network with military, industry, and academic leaders, and support our Space Force and the guardians who protect us. The SFA provides opportunities to research, inform, and advocate for a strong Space Force. SFA will keep you informed on the latest developments in space and our Space Force. Show your support. Sign up today at ussfa.org. That's ussfa.org.
My guest is Dr. Mark Eddings, who is the Senior Vice President of LMI's Space Market. He oversees all aspects of the market's growth, strategy, execution, and delivery. And prior to joining LMI, he was the technical director, this is a mouthful, for the Space, Security, and Defense Program in the role of primary technical advisor to the director of SSDP, where he was directly involved in shaping national space policy requirements, budget recommendations regarding military and commercial space security. And a little bit, Mark, about your educational background. You got a bachelor's in mechanical engineering and a doctorate in bioengineering, which is quite interesting, from the University of Utah. And you've published a number of peer-reviewed journal articles. You have some patents. You've been a busy guy. So welcome to the show.
Thank you, Bruce. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you on the show. So I've been really excited to get you on the show and to talk about some interesting things, particularly around orbital warfare, logistics in space. Those are interesting topics to talk about. But first, I'd love to just get a little tour of what brought you to where you are today.
Well, I was fortunate to join LMI after I left the government, and I had a great time working for the government. Great, 14 years almost of government service. And you mentioned I had a previous career in biotech, which is a whole nother story. It was a lot of fun, a great time. But the aerospace industry was calling, and working for the Air Force and then eventually the Space Force. So that journey, working for the government, brought me to LMI, where I'm fortunate to lead a great group of folks in our space market. LMI actually is, historically been a logistics company for many, many decades, well respected. And a few years ago, they acquired a space company that does modeling and simulation. a lot of work for the Space Warfighting and Analysis Center and the Space Security and Defense Program in the areas of orbital warfare and space data transport, missile warning, all of the areas where the Space Force is trying to decide what they're going to do in the future, what they need to buy now to get to the future. And one of those things is Golden Dome. One of those areas of high interest is space logistics and, of course, orbital warfare. So hopefully we'll get to talk more about that. But so my journey to get here has taken that government path, and now I'm excited to do it on the other side of the fence.
Yeah, that is exciting stuff. Yeah, in fact, we've just had some guests on the show, which this audience will hear about a little bit later, talking about interesting things like orbital warfare and Golden Dome. I would love to get into that a little bit. I know a little bit about orbital warfare. I have a technical background myself, but very little. And Golden Dome is something we hear about in the news sometimes, just kind of in the context of global tensions that are out there right now. Give us a little overview of what orbital warfare is all about.
So about 10, 12 years ago, the United States realized they had a problem. Space was no longer a sanctuary, and the shipping lanes that we try to protect here on the ground are emerging in space. There is a emerging commercial space economy, but there was already this strategic high ground that we needed to secure, but we could secure it very easily because there was nobody out there trying to contest, our missile warning satellites, our weather satellites, our GPS satellites. But our way of fighting wars around the world showed our adversaries that is a very, very important strategic high ground. And so other countries started to build weapons that threatened our capabilities in space, that advantage. And so the concept of orbital warfare had been around for many, many decades. It was a Cold War thing, but it's really been this emergence of the commercial industry, the ability to launch more satellites on a more rapid cadence, that the possibility of orbital warfare now of really emerging has become a real issue. And really with the stand-up of the Space Force, we needed a way to protect our shipping lanes in space and to preserve our military advantage. Orbital warfare is simply that cat and mouse game that's starting to emerge up in space, where satellites could engage each other. Missiles could be fired at other satellites. Lasers could be used, jamming other satellites from space. These ideas and concepts have been known, but now it's becoming more affordable. It's a more likely possibility.
That's interesting stuff, and I'm very curious about. You see, of course, on in movies, satellites shooting at each other and things like that, and then low Earth orbit. There's geosynchronous orbit. I mean, space is just near the Earth is a large volume. So is this really about like kinetic kinds of things? Like, hey, we're sending a satellite to go shoot down another satellite or blow it up, I guess, or is it more of like the jamming? I mean, what are the elements of orbital warfare that you have to consider?
Well, it used to be really about strategic nuclear war. Our most important satellites were up in GEO because that's how we would protect the homeland. That's how we would send our national command and control messages. That's where we would detect nuclear launches. And so it was all about preserving that advantage. And so, that's a long distance, and it's possible to jam those satellites, hard to do so. But they were up really high. And so you got to build missiles to go up there and hit those satellites. You have to jam them. It's hard to do. It's a different thought process that you have to go through if you want to threaten those satellites. But when they became vulnerable, meaning people are launching satellites into those orbits and being able to hold them at risk, then you just have to think through, okay, well, what does it mean? Do I need to defend these satellites? How do I defend them? Do we build one satellite? Do we build hundreds of satellites so that it's more difficult to target? And those are the questions of, sometimes you hear the word resiliency, cost, resiliency, the performance of the mission. In many cases, though, you're deciding, are we protecting people on the ground, or are we protecting a satellite in space? What's the value of that satellite to our warfighters on the ground? And ultimately, that's what matters until we really have people and viable economy in space. It's what are the missions we're preserving on the ground? Are we protecting fleet, ships, aircraft? Because a lot of the satellites that other countries are building are tracking our ships. They're tracking our ship movement. And so other countries have caught on. And so that's where the offensive, the defensive, what is this going to look like? It really doesn't end well, right? Nobody wants to have war in space. Nobody wants to create debris. It's ugly. And it could ruin all of our economic opportunities in space. And so I think that's the interesting policy debate that I was fortunate to be a part of, over the last 10 years of what is responsible behavior in space? How do we demonstrate responsible behavior? Should we be testing, anti-satellite weapons? The repercussions of creating debris, those all apply to this idea of orbital warfare. And they're going to apply to Golden Dome, right? They're going to apply to what does it mean to put hundreds or thousands of space-based interceptors up into space? How do you sustain hundreds of thousands of space-based interceptors up in space? It's a big logistics problem. Look what's happening in the Middle East. Look what's happening in Ukraine. It's one thing if the war lasts one day. What happens if the war lasts 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks? Those are the questions that people have to wrestle with, the planners have to wrestle with as we think through what orbital warfare means, what Golden Dome is really going to look like. And, at LMI, those are some of the problems that we want to help the government tackle.
Since you mentioned Golden Dome in relation to space policy and just kind of general orbital warfare things, can you put some meat on the bone for us on that? I mean, beyond the news, what is Golden Dome? You mentioned it's hundreds or thousands of elements. I mean, what is that? How does it work? Or at least how it's conceptualized today?
Well, fortunately, pieces of Golden Dome are in existence. We have satellites that are up there to track missile launches, track them through their flight. We have radars on the ground. We have a lot of infrastructure. The difference is when you're really focused on the homeland and you're focused on different types of threats. And I think that's where Golden Dome is going to be a fun problem. In that, do you tackle small UAVs coming across the southern border, flying near our Air Force bases? Is that part of what Golden Dome's responsible for? Or is it just responsible for strategic nuclear missiles that are launched from the other side of the world? And so to design an architecture, a Golden Dome that protects against that range of threats, from very small, short range to long range threats, you need different types of missiles to defend yourself against those different types of threats. Maybe you don't even need missiles. There's other ways of negating those threats. And so the challenge that people have, and I think why big budget numbers are thrown out for what Golden Dome is going to cost, is how many of those threats do we tackle? How certain do we want to be that no missile ever gets through? It's what's good enough. And so I think planners are going to think through, okay, well, we have some satellites today, we have some radars today, and we have some ground-based interceptors that are built to defend our country. How many more do we need to buy on the ground? What does a space-based interceptor architecture look like in space? And during Star Wars in the 80s, we looked at that problem and we understand the limitations, but we have a different launch enterprise now. It's more cost-effective than it used to be, but it's still a hard problem. And so that's what Golden Dome is going to be. It's going to be a mix of satellites. It's going to be a mix of space-based interceptors, ground-based interceptors, radars on the ground, whatever we need to do to track these threats, whether they're coming across the southern border via UAVs, whether they're already here and they're flying near our Air Force bases or overseas or whatnot. That's what I believe Golden Dome is going to end up looking like.
So it sounds like most of the technology for Golden Dome exists today. I mean, is that a fair statement?
I would say that the technology exists. I think that for it to be sustainable over decades, you have to stay agile with the threat. And so as the threat gets more capable, as they build more capable hypersonic glide vehicles, if they're more, as the threat becomes more complex, it'd probably be nice not to have metal on metal all the time. If we had a way to, destroy missiles without having to shoot 4 missiles at 1 missile, that would be great. I think people like the idea of lasers because the thought is you have an infinite magazine depth. But there's some technical challenges around lasers, right? And being able to track and do it, but there's some upside. Are there new and novel weapon types in research and development that can be used to destroy incoming missiles? I hope so. I think in classified channels there are ideas, but making them real, I think, is important. So yeah, I think there's an opportunity to repurpose existing technology and go fast to get us something in place. But I think some of the benefits of what happened during Star Wars is we kicked off a pretty robust research and development program into a lot of new basic physics and technologies, and it'd be nice to do the same thing so that not all the money goes into just today's technology, but maybe developing things that'll benefit us in the future.
How much do you think just kind of the recent challenges in the Middle East have kind of given us a heads up on what types of things we need to consider? I mean, I imagine that there was a lot of space-based assets that were used, and I would assume are still being used, to augment what's going on there. That's more of like a helping out the ground side of things. That's not a space-to-space kind of thing. But I mean, I've been trying to think of like recent conflicts or activities that have really highlighted the just kind of the benefits or the power of a space-based system. Has that been important, do you think, in this recent conflict?
Absolutely. I think one of the first things you need is a bell ringer, right? As soon as those missiles are launched, you want as much time as possible so that you can plan and prepare. In the case of the Israelis and the Ukrainians, it helps them have a semi-normal life where they don't have to live in bomb shelters all the time. So if you can get that launch warning, I think it's critical. I think that eventually you're going to have even better systems for tracking different types of missiles all through their flight, not just when they're launched. And that's critical to making sure that we don't waste missiles when we need to shoot down incoming missiles. I think one of the big problems is having confidence that when you shoot a missile, that this missile is going to do it. So sometimes we have to shoot 2, 3, 4, 5. And I think that's really the lesson that's coming through in both conflicts right now is they both dragged on longer than people would expect. And really the supply chain and the logistics associated with sustaining not only the offensive side for one country, but the defensive side where you're having to shoot even more interceptors to defend yourself. You know, there's a certain amount that leak through and unfortunately hit their target. The lesson I take away for space is if you commit to a space-based interceptor layer for your defense, that's a pretty high volume set of interceptors that you have to resupply, and they have a lifetime. And so there is a whole launch sustainment to how do you sustain infrastructure like that is playing out in Ukraine and Russia and probably Iran and in Israel. How do you survive the first wave and then live to continue to defend yourself? And I think that's all about supply chains and logistics, and it's always the Achilles heel for anybody that goes to war. How do you sustain?
Yeah, since you mentioned that, I mean, that is what LMI does, and I'm just going to make the leap of logic that's kind of your key role as a senior vice president for space for LMI, really diving in and making that happen. I'll be honest and tell you, I don't immediately associate logistics with space, but when you lay it out, it becomes obvious. Whether it's space or whether it's on the ground or on the sea, you have to be able to resupply yourself. And so I did come across something where there's discussion, or maybe it's an actual capability where you can actually bring fuel to your satellites these days, which is an obvious but surprising thing to me. So what does logistics in space look like? So I've got, say I'm a rogue, well, I won't be a rogue country. I'll just be a small country. I've got my own satellites up there. I need a logistics help. What does that look like?
Well, I think you almost need to start first with what am I providing logistics for? What am I resupplying? What is the purpose of what you're doing? And I think the military, the Space Force, and previously the Air Force has struggled with the military utility around, let's just say, refueling satellites in space. Is it cheaper to refuel, or is it cheaper to just launch a new one? And the cost of just putting a kilogram of mass into space has been expensive for many, many decades. And then obviously due to the reusable launch industry, the cost has come down. And so the thought calculus of resupply, refueling now is changing. It especially changes if there's an economic interest to do so. And so one of the first real use cases was, let's go up and let's extend the life of communication satellite. Let's say they spent $200 million to build it. They're making money off of leasing the transponders on that satellite. And what happens if you don't have enough fuel? Eventually you drift out of your orbit and it's no longer usable. The satellite might be great, but it gets out of its orbit and it's not effective. So they attach fuel, a way to control and keep that satellite, and then it extends its life for 5 years. There was an economic opportunity there for someone to build that attachment that's really just a big fuel tug and keep it in its orbital slot. So that's just one early example of refueling. But in terms of overall logistics, I think that what you're seeing with a lot of billionaires buying launch companies is if you want to get into the space-based internet business, which, Starlink has obviously proven there was a market for it, I think it's deploying and gaining access to data from people all over the world was the initial market for it. But I think you're going to start seeing people who want to do semiconductor manufacturing in space. You're going to see people who want to do data centers in space, free heating and cooling, right? Free vacuum. There's all these unique opportunities to take advantage of the economy of space once it's cheap to get there. And it's not intuitive yet to people, but once you figure out the logistics, some of these things become economic and there becomes a business case. And so, but the key to that is the logistics. Do you have enough launch sites? What's the launch cadence? How competitive is the launch industry? Does that kilogram of mass cost, $5 today, but 5 cents tomorrow, right? And that's where I think the opportunity and where logistics is really kind of just what will define the economic viability of these markets in the commercial side moving forward. So that's why, I think LMI is uniquely positioned to tell both sides of it, because there's logistics on the ground and there is logistics in space. And how do you effectively move mass from the ground and into space, from the production facilities all the way through to up in space? But then what if you start producing things in space and you want to bring those things back down? It's sort of the reverse. And that's where I think data centers, generating power, semiconductor manufacturing, biolabs, there's all sorts of new markets emerging. The cost per launch will dictate when they become viable.
So let me ask you on that point, and I'm not familiar with the current cost per kilo, but it's been coming down pretty dramatically since the private companies have gotten in the business. But where are we at in that curve as far as, hey, we want to manufacture some semiconductors in space? I mean, are we getting close to where it makes sense for some of these use cases, or is it still a ways off?
It absolutely is getting to the point where it makes sense. I mean, I think maybe silicon-based semiconductors might not be the most cost-effective because we've invested so much money on setting up the infrastructure on the ground. But there are some, I think, novel semiconductors that, if done in space, can be more cost-effective if you can get them down safely and produce them at a scale up in space that makes economic sense. And I think if the cost of reentry, now we talk about the cost of launch, there will be a cost associated with reentry. And if that starts to come down as well and becomes sustainable, then I think you'll find we'll be producing more than just semiconductors in space. There will be other things that emerge that there becomes a business case for. Right now, there's science projects on the space station, and they have been for decades. We did some of these experiments, 40, 50 years ago. But so we've proven that they can be done. It's just, can they be done cost effectively, and how much of these production parts should be done in space versus on the ground?
Yeah, and that's really all about the remoteness of space and the cost to get there and to get back. And so I guess you guys are thinking about these things from a logistics perspective, not just the launch, but I would say some unique reentry capabilities. Because if you have newly manufactured semiconductors, those could be very delicate in a lot of ways. And so how do you safely get them down, as you're saying? So, wow, that sounds like, I never thought logistics could be fun, but that actually sounds fun.
Well, and then you bring that all the way back to orbital warfare, right? So right now we're talking about a low Earth orbit economy. You're not really talking about shipping lanes quite yet. But as we extend beyond low Earth orbit and we get out to the moon, cislunar space, what sort of industry eventually develops on the moon? It'll be the same principle. When is the cost per kilogram to get to the moon and back reach a certain price point? When is there, economic opportunity on asteroids or the moon or wherever else? And then we're going to be talking about, well, how do we preserve our freedom of navigation in space all the way out to the moon? And the Space Force is talking about it, but it's still a little theoretical right now. But as soon as the first real economic opportunity emerges, I think that's when you'll find that different countries will want to secure those economic interests. And that's when conflict happens, right? And so orbital warfare is all part of that, and really understanding how you would protect yourself.
Yeah, interesting. Well, we're about to get back into that. The moon is about to come in focus again as we send some people out there again, and I think other nations will do the same. So it's interesting stuff. One last question for you, Mark. Completely off the beaten path, but I noticed going way back your mechanical engineering day. So I'm an electrical engineer from way back. I'm curious, your favorite class, or you can pick least favorite, either one.
Well, not for the material. My least favorite class was my 730 fluid mechanics class, 5 days a week. That was probably my least favorite class to get up for. But, I really enjoyed my senior design class that I had. I had a great advisor and mentor who got me excited in bioengineering, ironically. And we worked on how to fabricate microneedles for painless insulin delivery. And, I didn't know it at the time. Ironically, I ended up having a son who's a diabetic. And, it just sort of brought back to me the importance of these problems that we work on, is that there's human beings, there are people behind these solutions that you're working on, and that they can dramatically improve lives. I think space is one of those areas where it's not always easy for people to understand how space touches them every day. Obviously insulin delivery, that's an easy thing. I think if people understood how space touches their lives every day, every aspect of their day, they pull out their phone, they don't understand how they depend on space. I think it'll help people in their jobs better to, get up every day to go work on these fun problems, because they do impact lives. And that's what I love about engineering. And I loved about that class.
Yeah. Well said. Dr. Mark Eddings, Senior Vice President of LMI Space Market. Mark, thanks for sharing with us today.
Thank you, Bruce. Appreciate it again.